If no one would marry a pregnant ex, then how did she end up being the most watched bride on earth while carrying his baby? That night, millions of people witnessed the unthinkable. A woman who'd been dumped while pregnant, walking down the aisle with a billionaire, streaming the entire wedding live. No edits, no rehearsals, just truth and revenge. She wore a white gown, no tears in her eyes, and a smile that said no man had ever broken her. The man beside her, Ethan Vale, wasn't just the youngest billionaire on the Forbes cover. He was the definition of loyalty, of power. And right there in front of the world, he said, "I don't just love her. I'm proud to be the father of the child she's carrying." As for her ex, he was at the same gala too, holding hands with his new fiancée, staring in shock as the woman he once called a burden turned into a queen. Not just because she was loved, but because she was no longer afraid to be alone. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a comeback, a warning shot, and a wake-up call for every man who ever thought a pregnant woman could be thrown away. The ballroom gasped, and for a split second, time stopped. It was supposed to be his night, his victory lap after discarding the woman who, just months ago, carried his child and begged him not to walk away. Tonight, surrounded by media and luxury, Thomas Reed stood tall beside his new fiancée, a socialite with a surgically perfect smile and a diamond ring that screamed arrogance. He laughed, drank, posed for pictures, and kissed her publicly like nothing from his past mattered. Then the double doors creaked open, cameras turned, heads swiveled, champagne flutes paused midair. Standing at the entrance was the woman he once called a mistake. She was 6 months pregnant when he left her. And now? She was in a couture wedding gown that shimmered under the crystal lights, flawless makeup, chin high, and eyes sharp. But it wasn't just her presence that shattered the illusion of his perfect new beginning. It was the man standing next to her. Ethan Vale, billionaire, tech genius, global heartthrob, and now, husband of Thomas's unmarriable ex. The media didn't blink. They went feral. Dozens of cameras exploded into flashes. Live streams went viral within minutes. Hashtags erupted. Ex-wife glow up, from rejected to royalty, livestream wedding. The internet was watching, and they were living for it. As Thomas choked on his drink and his new fiancée clutched his arm in confused panic, the ballroom became a theater of poetic revenge. His ex, Ariel Monroe, smiled like the world was exactly as it should be. Because it was. 6 months ago, she had nothing. No support, no money, just a broken heart and a positive pregnancy test. But tonight, she had the world's attention, the man of every woman's dream, and a wedding ring that came with more zeros than Thomas could ever imagine. Thomas once said, "No one will want a woman like you. Not with a baby, not with your baggage." But Ariel didn't just prove him wrong. She broadcasted it, live. And this was only the beginning. Let's continue building up this hook scene into a full 1100 words. Continuing. Ariel stepped forward, her heels echoing against the marble floor, with a rhythm that sounded almost like vengeance. Her gown wasn't just beautiful, it was iconic. Custom made by a Parisian designer, hand-stitched pearls, and a silhouette that screamed elegance and power. She wasn't just crashing the gala, she was owning it. Ethan, tall and devastating in a tailored tux, walked beside her with the calm confidence of a man who controlled not just empires, but headlines. He kept one hand resting at the small of Ariel's back, protective but proud. Their chemistry wasn't forced or showy, it was undeniable, and everyone saw it. Thomas's face drained of color as Ariel and Ethan made their way toward the stage. The very stage where Thomas had planned to announce his engagement, make a toast, and declare himself the luckiest man alive. Not anymore. As they passed by, someone in the crowd whispered, "Isn't that the ex?" Another voice followed, "The pregnant one he dumped?" A third, "That's his kid she's carrying, right?" Jesus. The whispers turned to murmurs. The murmurs turned into chaos. But Ariel? She didn't flinch. With every step, she reminded the world that the woman Thomas discarded was never broken, only underestimated. When she reached the center of the room, Ethan raised a glass, clinking it gently with a silver knife. The room stilled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice deep and measured. "Forgive the interruption, but tonight is special. Not just because of the company, but because I've just married the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Gasps. Phones lifted. Someone dropped a wine glass. Ariel turned to him, eyes gleaming. Ethan smiled back. Some of you may know her story, but let me be the first to say, no woman's worth is measured by the opinion of the man who left her. Ariel isn't just my wife, she's my miracle. Thunderous applause broke out. A few guests even stood up. Others, mainly those in Thomas's circle, looked like ghosts. In the crowd, Thomas's new fiancée muttered, "What the hell is happening?" He couldn't answer. His mouth was dry. His world was collapsing. Ariel took the microphone next. Her voice was calm, even playful. "When I was left, I was 6 months pregnant. No job, no home, and no clue how I'd survive. But I did, and I want to thank the man who inspired this journey, Thomas Reed." The crowd gasped again. She continued, "You told me I'd never be wanted, that no man would marry a pregnant woman with no future. I believed you for a while. I cried. I doubted myself. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say, 'Roses bloom best in broken soil.' You were my storm, but I was the seed." Silence. Then applause, louder this time. "I didn't just survive, I thrived. I fell in love, I married the most amazing man, and now?" She held up her left hand, flashing the diamond ring. "I'm more than a wife, I'm a damn lesson." The room erupted. Every camera was on her. Every social media feed was flooded. Thomas had been annihilated not with rage, but with elegance. Not with violence, but with truth. This wasn't just revenge. This was history. And the world would never forget the night a billionaire married the woman her ex said no one would ever love. If anyone had told Ariel Monroe 2 years ago that she'd be trending worldwide on her wedding day, not as a scandalized ex but as a triumphant bride to a billionaire, she would have laughed through the tears. Back then, she was just Ariel, 28, a part-time waitress, a freelance photographer, and barely holding it together. She lived in a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat in South Brooklyn, where the scent of detergent never quite faded and the radiator made more noise than a subway train. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't Instagram-worthy, but it was hers. After a rocky childhood bouncing between foster homes, she learned not to rely on anyone but herself. She worked 2 jobs, she cooked for 1. And she trusted no one until she met Thomas. Thomas Reed came into her life like a lightning strike. He was polished, smooth, and wealthy in a way that made her feel like she was walking in a movie. They met at a private tech expo where Ariel had been hired last minute to shoot product photos. She was wearing ripped jeans and secondhand boots. He was in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He noticed her before she noticed him. "You've got a good eye," he said, watching her crouch beside a product display for the perfect angle. She looked up, skeptical. "You can tell that from me squatting on the floor?" He chuckled. "I can tell you're not here to be seen. You're here to see. That's rare." That line? It melted her. Their romance ignited quickly. Lavish dinners, long drives in his luxury car, weekends in the Hamptons. For a moment, Ariel thought she was dreaming. He made her feel chosen, like she was finally enough for something more than survival. She let her guard down, gave him her heart, and eventually, her body. When she missed her period, she didn't panic. In fact, part of her felt hopeful. Scared, sure, but hopeful. She'd always wanted a family, stability, love. Thomas seemed overjoyed at first. He touched her belly with wonder, said things like, "Our baby's going to have your smile, and I'll build the best nursery in New York." But as her belly grew, his warmth thinned. The fancy dinners stopped, the calls got shorter, the silences got longer. Then came that night. She remembered it vividly. 7 months pregnant, wearing the hoodie he once said made her look adorably scruffy, standing in their kitchen while he packed a duffel bag. "Where are you going?" she asked, heart pounding. "To live my life," he said coldly. You're an anchor now. You were fun when you were light. Now you're heavy, with needs. With a baby, with expectations. "Are you serious?" she gasped. "You told me you loved me, that you wanted this child. I loved the idea of you," he spat. "But you? Now, you're just baggage." Then he dropped the final bomb. "No man wants a pregnant ex. You'll see." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not in front of him. She just stood there, frozen, as the man she loved walked out the door, leaving behind the ashes of her fairy tale. What he didn't know was that Ariel wasn't built to stay broken. The first few weeks were hell. She pawned her camera equipment to pay rent. She skipped meals so the baby could have prenatal vitamins. She stood in welfare lines for the first time in her life and cried in the bathroom so no one would see. But the turning point came on a Tuesday morning when she opened her mailbox to find a letter from a woman she'd never met, Claudia Monroe. Her last name. Inside was a handwritten note. Ariel, I've spent years searching for you. I'm your aunt, your mother's younger sister. You were taken into foster care after the accident, but we never stopped looking. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet. Also, I think there's something you should know about your inheritance. That day, Ariel learned the truth. She wasn't a forgotten orphan. She was the last living heir to the Monroe estate. A billion-dollar legacy built on shipping, real estate, and old money roots she'd never known she had. Her mother, Camille Monroe, had walked away from the family years ago, trying to raise Ariel in normalcy before the tragic car crash. But her mother never changed her will. Ariel was a billionaire and didn't even know it, but she didn't go on a spending spree. She didn't post it online. She didn't even tell her ex. Instead, she met with attorneys, structured her trusts, and went back to school. Business courses, finance, leadership. She wasn't going to be some spoiled rich girl. She was going to be unstoppable, for her child and for herself. She started therapy, took birthing classes, bought a townhouse in Tribeca with her name only on the deed. She invested in maternity fashion brands that actually made pregnant women feel powerful. And every morning she looked in the mirror and whispered, he was wrong. Then came Ethan Vale. They met at a charity gala, one she almost didn't attend because she thought her bump would make her stand out. Ethan was keynote speaker and a notoriously private tech billionaire known for never dating in public. But he saw her. Not just her figure or her face, he saw her. He walked up to her during cocktail hour and said, "You look like you've conquered hell and dared it to come back." She laughed, surprised. "You don't know the half of it." "Then tell me," he said, with eyes that didn't flinch. "I've got time." They talked all night. From there, the rest wasn't a whirlwind. It was a slow, intentional, earned love. He came to doctor appointments. He held her hand during Braxton Hicks' contractions. He never tried to save her. He just stood beside her while she saved herself. And when he proposed, it wasn't in some flash mob spectacle. It was in her living room on a rainy Tuesday night with Chinese takeout and her belly kicking under a cashmere blanket. "I want to build a future with both of you," he said simply, "if you'll let me." She didn't cry. She smiled and said yes. Because she was no longer the girl who thought love meant being chosen. She was the woman who chose herself first. The Vale estate wasn't just a mansion. It was a monument to legacy, silence, and power. Tucked along the cliffs of Bridgehampton, its sprawling grounds stretched across 45 acres of manicured gardens, white rose hedges, reflecting pools, and ocean views that felt like they belonged in a dream. Generations of wealth had touched every inch of the land, but tonight, something different stirred in the air. Tonight, it wasn't just about wealth. It was about rebirth. The event had been advertised quietly but deliberately, an exclusive evening gala to raise funds for the Vale Foundation's Women's Health Initiative. The guest list included CEOs, diplomats, and Hollywood royalty. The press were told it was a private benefit. They weren't told it would double as a wedding. Not until it was already streaming live. From the first step onto the estate, guests were greeted by valet drivers in white gloves and escorted down a cobblestone drive lined with floating candles. The entry hall alone had ceilings 3 stories high, lined with imported Italian frescoes. But the real magic waited in the courtyard behind the estate, transformed into an ethereal ballroom under the stars. A glass dome had been custom-built just for the night. It shimmered like stardust against the black sky, laced with strands of light that looked like constellations. Beneath it, chandeliers floated mid-air, suspended by nearly invisible rigging, and cast golden hues across a floor of polished black marble. The centerpiece? A grand staircase made entirely of white orchids, descending into the main floor, where hundreds of guests stood in gowns and tuxedos, sipping champagne that never stopped flowing. It was opulence. It was spectacle. It was Ethan Vale. But despite the extravagance, the night had heart. On one side of the ballroom stood an enormous LED screen, streaming video clips from women's clinics the Vale Foundation supported. On another side, guests were invited to write messages to mothers and daughters on digital message boards, which would later be printed and sent to hospitals around the world. Ariel had insisted on it. She didn't want a wedding that only celebrated love. She wanted a wedding that created it, multiplied it, gave it away to people who needed it most. At the center of it all, her bridal suite overlooked the event from the second floor. It was quiet, almost sacred. Velvet drapes framed arched windows, the smell of gardenias wafted from fresh bouquets. Makeup artists moved in hushed tones. Stylists adjusted details on her dress with reverence. It wasn't just any gown, it was the dress. Designed by Valentina de Rossi, custom-stitched in Milan, the gown took 400 hours to complete. Silk layers fell like liquid light. Tiny crystals traced the neckline and disappeared into the sleeves like frozen stars. A cathedral-length veil hung behind her, but it was the hand-embroidered words stitched along the hem that made the dress unforgettable. What was once broken now wears a crown. It was her story, in fabric. Downstairs, Ethan waited in a tuxedo that made 100 women forget their dates. His best man, a retired general, joked quietly, "You sure you want to marry a woman who already wins every argument?" Ethan laughed, eyes still locked on the staircase. "I'd marry her even if she started the arguments." He was nervous, but not for the reasons people assumed. He wasn't afraid of commitment. He was afraid of failing her, of not being enough. She had survived so much. She had rebuilt herself from ashes while pregnant and alone, and somehow she still loved him, chose him. That was the most humbling part. Then the music changed. Not a traditional wedding march, but a modern, symphonic remix of Rise Up by Andra Day. The notes climbed slowly, then soared, and the crowd turned. Ariel appeared at the top of the orchid staircase like a vision no one could have prepared for. The glass dome above reflected her like a living constellation. 1,000 phones lifted, cameras zoomed, but no one moved, no one spoke. Even Thomas Reed, standing in the far right corner with his fiancée clinging to his elbow, couldn't breathe. There she was, the woman he left, glowing, powerful, unbothered. A goddess carrying his child and marrying a man 10 times the man he'd ever be. The moment felt like justice. Ariel descended the stairs slowly, her veil trailing behind her like mist. Her face was serene, poised. Her hand rested gently on her stomach, just a touch. Not to draw attention, but to remind herself, "You made it, you both did." The ceremony was brief but breathtaking. The officiant, a retired judge who had once helped women escape abusive marriages, spoke about choice, strength, and the audacity of second chances. Ethan's vows made the crowd cry. "I didn't fall in love with the version of you the world sees now," he said, holding her hands. "I fell in love with the fighter in sweatpants, eating cereal at 2 a.m., trying to make sense of the pain. You didn't need saving, Ariel. You needed witnessing. And I'll spend every day watching you rise." Ariel's voice never wavered during her vows. "I thought love meant begging someone to stay," she said softly. "But you showed me that love is freedom, security, pride, and I promise to raise this child with you, not in survival, but in joy." They kissed. The glass dome lit up with gold lights like fireflies. Confetti made of rose petals rained from above. But the real eruption came seconds later, because just as they turned to face the crowd as husband and wife, her phone buzzed in her bouquet. A notification. She smiled. The live stream had hit 5.2 million viewers, and Thomas, he looked like he might throw up. Thomas Reed never liked being ignored. In fact, being the center of attention was how he breathed. At parties, at work, in relationships, he needed to be seen. He needed people to admire him, fear him, envy him. But tonight, no one was looking his way. All eyes were on Ariel and Ethan, glowing in the aftermath of their vows, bathed in golden light and thunderous applause. Thomas sat stiffly at a table near the back, clutching a champagne flute so hard his knuckles turned white. Next to him, Isabel Donahue, his fiancée, flipped her hair and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had noticed the shift too. "They really did stream it," she whispered, watching guests around them gasp as they scrolled through their phones. "It's on every platform." Thomas didn't respond. His jaw clenched, his vision blurred with rage. He didn't just lose the spotlight. He lost the war. When he left Ariel, it was supposed to be final. He told himself she'd never bounce back. That no man in his right mind would take on a woman mid-pregnancy, especially one without money, status, or a family name. She had been disposable, an inconvenience to his climb. He was on the brink of landing a six-figure investor role with Rains and Coster, one of the city's most exclusive hedge funds. A crying baby and a tired girlfriend didn't fit the image, so he left her, coldly, callously, without warning or guilt. He moved into a high-rise in Tribeca, bought new suits, and posted photos with Isabel, his upgrade, at gallery openings and yacht parties. Ariel had messaged him twice after the breakup, once about her ultrasound, once asking if he'd at least be at the birth. He didn't respond to either. He thought silence would remind her who had the power. But silence has a funny way of aging badly. Isabel, meanwhile, was never in love with Thomas. She was in love with what he promised. Tall, polished, and good at pretending to be more successful than he was, he fit the mold of the type of man she'd been raised to pursue. Her family didn't care about love. They cared about status. Marriage was a transaction, and Thomas, at the time, seemed like a decent investment. But now he looked pathetic. "This is embarrassing," Isabel hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You said she was done. You said she'd probably end up in a shelter." Thomas glared at her. "I didn't think she had billionaire relatives or some miracle rebound waiting in the wings." Isabel raised an eyebrow. "It's not just a rebound. It's Ethan Vale. He's worth $6 billion and just married the woman you dumped. You didn't just lose a girlfriend. You created a power couple." The words hit like bricks. Thomas had worked years to build his image. Smooth, strategic, always in control. But Ariel's reemergence exposed him. She didn't just outshine him. She humiliated him. And the worst part, she did it without trying. Back when they dated, he remembered criticizing her constantly. About her clothes, her hair, her lack of ambition. "You could be so much more," he used to say, twisting concern into condescension. "If only you tried harder." She had tried, just not the way he wanted. She had tried to please him, love him, keep him comfortable. That version of Ariel had died the night he walked out. And the woman standing under that glass dome, flawless, untouchable, carrying his child in a gown worth more than his car, was someone he no longer recognized. And it terrified him. The reception dragged on. Guests gushed over the bride. Paparazzi slipped past security. Ethan made a toast about love being stronger than shame. Thomas didn't clap. Isabel pretended to text. "I need air," Thomas muttered, rising from his chair and heading for the side terrace. The night air was crisp, filled with salt from the ocean. Lights from the estate flickered behind him. He stared out at the water, trying to steady his breath, but his thoughts kept circling. He had a chance to build something with Ariel. She had been kind, loyal, and gentle. But none of those traits excited him. He wanted glamour, prestige, and now he was left with neither. Behind him, Isabel followed. "You look like you're going to throw yourself off the cliff," she said flatly, arms folded. "Don't. Not before we get the prenup finalized." Thomas turned to her, bitter. "You're loving this, aren't you?" Isabel shrugged. "I'm just adjusting my expectations. I thought I was marrying a rising star, not the guy who became the internet's favorite villain." "You could leave, you know," he snapped. "I could," she said calmly, "but I don't run when things get messy. I just start planning a new strategy." He hated her sometimes, her calculating gaze, her constant need for leverage. But deep down he also feared her, because she saw straight through him. "I made a mistake," he said suddenly. "With her?" Isabel asked. "With everything." Isabel looked at him for a long moment. "Well, maybe you did. But here's the thing, Thomas. She's not coming back. You left her when she was at her weakest, and now she's got power, a platform, and a husband who actually wants to be there." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "You know what I realized tonight? You weren't afraid of her failing. You were afraid of her winning without you." Thomas flinched. She was right. Ariel's strength scared him because it didn't need him. He wasn't her hero. He was her villain. He looked back toward the ballroom. Through the glass he saw Ariel laughing, her head tilted back as Ethan whispered something in her ear. The crowd adored her. The media praised her. And millions of viewers watched her become the woman he swore no one would want. She didn't just prove him wrong. She rewrote the ending he thought he controlled. The day everything fell apart didn't start with thunder. It started with sunshine, lavender pancakes, and a fluttering baby kick that made Ariel smile while holding her belly. She was 7 months pregnant and still believed in miracles. She still believed in Thomas. He had promised to meet her for brunch after work. They were supposed to finalize baby names and tour a birthing center. She had curled her hair, put on the soft blue maternity dress he said made her glow. She even printed out a sonogram to surprise him. She waited at the cafe for over an hour. No text, no call. Her phone sat on the table like a dead thing. She stared at it until the waiter, gently embarrassed, offered her a to-go box on the house. Her eyes burned, but she smiled politely, thanked him, walked home in silence. Still, she excused it. Work emergency, she told herself. He's stressed, he'll explain. But the next morning brought headlines she wasn't prepared for. Page6.com. Tech investor Thomas Reed spotted with NYC socialite Isabel Donahue. Reed's hand was seen resting on her lower back as they entered the private dining room at Le Marais. Ariel blinked, then blinked again. She zoomed in on the grainy photo. There he was. The man who said he was working late. The man she made pancakes for. The man who hadn't returned a single message in 48 hours, holding another woman like she was his future. The betrayal didn't hit all at once. It came in waves. The first wave was denial, then panic, then heartbreak that felt like labor pains, but in her chest. She texted him, "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." He didn't reply. She called him, voicemail, straight to voicemail. 3 hours later, she received a text. No greeting, no apology. "It's over. You deserve someone who wants what you want. I don't." She stared at the message. Her fingers trembled, her belly kicked. She felt dizzy. That night, her world didn't just break, it exploded. The days that followed were a blur of sobbing, silence, and shame. Her phone buzzed constantly, not from him, but from gossip blogs tagging her name. She wasn't famous, but she was visible now. Every headline called her the pregnant ex. Paparazzi hovered outside her apartment, hoping to catch her crying in sweats. And she did cry, but not for Thomas. She cried for the woman who trusted him. The woman who thought being quiet and loyal would earn protection. The woman who believed in fairy tales and family. That woman had died. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public. He hadn't left quietly, he hadn't respected her privacy. He flaunted Isabel like a trophy, while Ariel's body ached and changed daily to carry a life he helped create. At one point, a tabloid posted a poll. Should Thomas Reed be forced to support his ex's baby? The comments were brutal. She trapped him. He's upgrading. She should have locked it down before getting knocked up. It was like the internet had torn open her uterus and decided her worth based on his net worth. She stayed off social media for weeks. The baby moved constantly. Each kick reminded her that she couldn't stay shattered, that something innocent depended on her rising from this wreckage. Then came the final blow. A charity gala. Same night they were supposed to have their baby shower. She hadn't planned to attend, but a friend had texted, "You need to see this." The live stream played on her laptop. High society, black tuxedos, champagne towers, and there, center stage, Thomas with Isabel on his arm. He introduced her as the woman who made him believe in real love again. Ariel stared at the screen, hand on her belly, breath shallow. Then Isabel leaned in, kissed Thomas on the cheek, and said into the microphone, "Some women are meant to be mothers. Others are meant to be muses. I guess I'm lucky. I get to be both." The crowd laughed. Thomas smirked. Ariel's vision tunneled. They knew what they were doing. It was intentional, cruel, a declaration of war disguised as a toast. She stood from her couch and nearly collapsed. But instead of crying, she walked to the bathroom mirror. She stared at herself. Eyes puffy, hair undone, oversized hoodie hanging off one shoulder. Then, slowly, she peeled the hoodie off. Underneath, her belly curved gracefully. Her body, stretched and marked by new life, didn't look broken. It looked powerful. She wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a woman chosen, by life itself, to protect something sacred. That night, she didn't fall apart. She made a plan. She called a lawyer the next day, not to sue Thomas, not yet, but to secure custody rights and draw up parenting boundaries. She wouldn't beg him to be a father, but she'd make sure he never had power over their child's future. Then she met with her aunt, Claudia Monroe, for tea. For weeks, Claudia had been trying to reconnect, to explain her family's legacy. Ariel had pushed her away, afraid of opening another door just to be left alone again. But now she was ready to open all the doors. The betrayal that was meant to break her had done the opposite. It woke her up. And the woman staring back in the mirror? The one carrying a child and a grudge? She wasn't going to disappear quietly. She was going to rise louder than they ever imagined. Ariel didn't sleep for 3 nights straight after the gala livestream. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the lies. It was the echo of Isabel's voice saying, some women are meant to be mothers, others are meant to be muses. It was the way Thomas laughed at that line, like her pregnancy was a punchline. That laugh haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them, drinking champagne, smiling for cameras, erasing her like she had never existed. Like the child growing inside her wasn't real. Like she was just a placeholder until someone more inspiring showed up. By the 4th day she cracked. The apartment felt like a prison. Every room reminded her of him. The couch where he used to rub her feet. The kitchen where he said he couldn't wait to cook for their baby. The bathroom mirror where she once practiced telling him, "We're having a girl." She had thrown up that morning, not from morning sickness, but from heartbreak. She stood in front of the fridge, staring at the takeout container she hadn't touched. Her phone buzzed with messages from her aunt, her lawyer, a couple of friends. But she ignored them all. Then she dropped to the floor. No drama, no noise, just collapsed slowly like her bones stopped working. She sat there for 2 hours, her back against the fridge, knees curled up, hands resting on her belly. Why did he leave us? She whispered to the air. Why weren't we enough? There was no answer, only silence, and a dull ache in her chest that felt like drowning. She started crying then. Not the cinematic tears that stream down cheeks in movies. Real crying. The kind that leaves you choking, gasping, forehead pressed to tile. The kind that turns your voice raw and makes your whole body shake like it's rejecting the grief because it's too heavy to carry. She cried for the girl who believed in forever. She cried for the woman who tried so hard to be patient, supportive, kind, even when she knew, deep down, something was off. She cried for the baby inside her, whose father walked away like they were just a bad investment. She cried until the light through the window changed color. Then the panic set in. Her mind started racing. How will I pay rent next month? What if I go into labor alone? What if I don't get maternity leave? What if something happens and I'm the only one there? What if— She stood up abruptly, knocking over a glass of water she hadn't touched. She needed answers. She needed plans. She needed control. So she opened her laptop. For the first time since the scandal broke, she searched her own name and instantly regretted it. Her face was everywhere. Screenshots of her old Instagram, rumors about who the baby's father really was, speculation about whether Ethan Vale had rescued her, blog headlines, pregnant and dumped, how Thomas Reed moved up, ex-girlfriend or opportunist, Ariel Monroe's billionaire bounce back, Isabel Donahue, the real woman behind the man. She closed the laptop with a slam. Her breathing quickened. That's when the first panic attack hit. Her hands went numb. Her heart pounded in her ears. She couldn't get air into her lungs. She stumbled into the bedroom, hands grasping at nothing, whispering over and over, "Please, not now. Please, not now." She collapsed on the bed, holding her belly, trying to calm herself. The baby kicked. A tiny, perfect reminder that she wasn't alone. That she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not completely. Not yet. Later that night, she finally answered her aunt's call. Claudia's voice was calm but firm. "I'm outside. Let me in." Ariel opened the door in pajamas, her eyes swollen, hair matted. But Claudia didn't flinch. She just walked in, wrapped her in a long, grounding hug, and said nothing for the first minute. Ariel broke down again, but this time, she wasn't alone. They sat on the couch as Claudia stroked her hair and said gently, "You don't have to be strong all the time, baby girl. You just have to be here. That's enough for today." And for the first time in weeks, Ariel believed her. They talked for hours, about pain, about family, about survival. Claudia told her stories of her own heartbreak, her own losses. She reminded Ariel that being abandoned doesn't mean being unworthy. It means the person who left was never built to stay. "You know what grief is?" Claudia said, pouring tea. "It's love with nowhere to go. But soon, that love's going to have a home, in your arms, in your baby's eyes." That night, Ariel slept. She dreamed of oceans and lullabies. She dreamed of beginnings, not endings. And when she woke up, the pain was still there. But it didn't own her anymore. She owned herself. And that would have to be enough, for now. It started with a sealed envelope. Claudia handed it to Ariel 2 weeks after the breakdown, over breakfast and soft sunlight in the living room. The envelope was thick, heavy, and crisp, like it belonged in a vault. "I've been waiting to give you this," Claudia said. "But you needed to be ready." Ariel blinked, still groggy, a buttered croissant halfway to her lips. "Ready for what?" Claudia smiled. "To remember who you really are." Inside the envelope were two things, a letter and a key. The letter was on thick linen paper, written in elegant cursive. Ariel recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her mother's. Her hands trembled as she read, "My darling Ariel, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to tell you the truth in person. But know this first. I never wanted to leave you unprotected. You are not alone, and you are not without power. You come from a legacy, a name older than most countries. You are a Monroe, and everything I walked away from was for you." She stopped reading. Tears threatened to spill, but this time they didn't come from grief. They came from clarity, from understanding that the ordinary life she had known was never the full story. Claudia sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your mom didn't just fall in love with a dreamer. She fell in love with freedom. She gave up the Monroe fortune to raise you on her terms. But before she died, she came to me and said, 'If anything happens to me, make sure Ariel knows she's not a nobody.'" Ariel's lips parted. "But I thought she was cut off, that we were poor." Claudia chuckled. "Your mother was stubborn. She didn't want the money to define you, but she never gave it away. She just hid it." The key, Claudia explained, opened a private safety deposit box at a bank in Midtown Manhattan. Inside was a trust account, investments, deeds, and family shares in Monroe Global Holdings, an international shipping and energy conglomerate with over $9 billion in assets. Ariel stared at the key. She wasn't broke. She wasn't abandoned. She was an heiress. The next few days were a blur of bank appointments, security verifications, and attorney meetings. The Monroe family trust was airtight, updated in her mother's handwriting, legally bound to protect Ariel until her 30th birthday, or sooner, if triggered by a crisis of survival or abuse. Thomas leaving her pregnant, homeless, and unemployed? Definitely counted. When the bank officer opened the deposit box and handed her the contents, Ariel felt like she had stepped into a movie. There were bearer bonds, property deeds, a thumb drive with protected files labeled Private Monroe Family Legacy, and at the very bottom, a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was a diamond necklace once owned by her great-grandmother, and a note. "For the day she remembers she's royalty." Claudia was right. She wasn't just a woman with a broken heart. She was a woman with power. And the first thing she did with that power? She hired a team. Ariel wasn't interested in revenge yet. She wanted protection, boundaries, strategy. She hired a female-led law firm that specialized in family law and public privacy. They froze any unauthorized use of her name or the babies in tabloid contracts. They began pre-negotiating custody protections for the child before birth. But the real twist came during a routine legal audit of Thomas's past messages. That's when Ariel's attorney found it. A deleted voicemail file recovered from a phone backup. It had been auto-synced to her cloud account before Thomas left. It was from Thomas, left 2 weeks before he broke up with her. He was talking to someone else. A man. His voice was low and careless. "Yeah, man, she's knocked up. Perfect timing, actually. Sympathy card's gonna help my Reigns pitch. We'll look like a Family Guy angle. Investors eat that up. Then I'm dropping her. Got something hotter lined up anyway." Ariel felt her stomach churn. But she didn't cry this time. She laughed, low, bitter, empowered. She saved the voicemail, sent it to her lawyer, and added it to a sealed file named "For the Day He Tries to Come Back." 3 weeks later, Thomas's attorney sent her a message. He wanted to discuss involvement. He wanted to stay connected with the baby. He wanted to talk about what's fair. Ariel didn't respond right away. She forwarded the message to her legal team. Then she poured a glass of iced tea, sat on her sunlit balcony, and smiled. Thomas had no idea. No idea that the woman he discarded now had legal leverage, financial power, and public goodwill. No idea that the girl who used to beg him to come home now had guards at the gate and lawyers on speed dial. No idea that the baby he walked out on would never know what it meant to be unwanted. She was no longer surviving. She was building a legacy. And every lie Thomas had told, the world would soon hear, but on her terms. Ariel Monroe's rebirth didn't happen in a flash of designer heels or a perfectly filtered Instagram photo. It happened in pieces. In the early morning light pouring through her new penthouse window. In the journal she scribbled in between prenatal appointments. In the quiet strength that came from answering her phone with, "This is Ariel Monroe. How can I help you?" Instead of, "Hi, sorry to bother you." It began with reclaiming her reflection. For months, Ariel had stared into mirrors and seen nothing but tired eyes, swollen ankles, and sadness. But now she stared back at a woman who had survived heartbreak, public humiliation, and near total collapse, and still stood. Her first act of transformation wasn't aesthetic. It was mental. She started therapy twice a week, intensive sessions that peeled back years of silence, people-pleasing, and suppressed anger. She faced every fear, every abandonment wound, every moment where she made herself small to be loved. "No more shrinking," her therapist said. "If they can't handle your full height, they don't deserve your presence." Ariel nodded, and the shift began. She deleted old voicemails from Thomas, unfollowed every page that profited from shaming single mothers. She even donated her old maternity clothes, the ones she wore when she still hoped he'd return. Then came the outside shift. Claudia introduced her to Elena Saint, a discreet stylist who worked exclusively with women in transition, divorcees, CEOs, survivors. Elena didn't ask for mood boards. She asked for truth. "Who do you want to be when you walk into a room?" she asked. Ariel thought about it, then answered, "Someone who no longer apologizes for existing." The transformation wasn't about vanity, it was about visibility, about dressing like she believed in herself, even on the days she was still scared. Her wardrobe changed. Gone were the soft, shapeless sweaters. In came tailored coats, sharp silhouettes, buttery fabrics that hugged her pregnancy curves with confidence, not shame. Her hair, once always pulled back in tired buns, now fell in soft waves, natural, empowered. She walked differently now. Not to seduce, but to command. She even returned to photography, not as a gig worker scrambling for scraps, but as a visionary. She launched a digital campaign, Mothers of Power, featuring portraits of pregnant women, single moms, and caretakers from all walks of life, styled, lit, and posed like royalty. It went viral. Overnight, Ariel wasn't just the pregnant ex. She was an icon of comeback. Brand deals started trickling in. Not the superficial kind, but partnerships that aligned with her purpose. Prenatal wellness, women-led startups, mental health initiatives. She accepted carefully, negotiating equity stakes and creative control. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just taking what she was given, she was choosing. Her mornings became sacred. Herbal tea, meditation, prenatal yoga. Her phone buzzed constantly now, her assistant filtering requests. She met weekly with a business advisor, discussed launching her own foundation. But what really marked her transformation wasn't the glow-up, or the money, or the clothes. It was the moment she walked past her old apartment building. It had been raining. She wore sunglasses and a camel trench coat, her belly round and proud. She looked up at the cracked windows where she once cried herself to sleep, and she smiled. Not out of spite, out of gratitude. That girl was gone, and in her place stood a woman who knew her worth. The final piece of her transformation came when she stood on stage, 7 months pregnant, at a conference titled Women Who Lead. She hadn't planned to speak. She had just come to support another speaker. But when a last-minute cancellation opened a slot, the event director approached her. "Would you be willing to share your story?" she asked. Ariel hesitated. Then she looked down at her belly. "Yes," she said. She walked on stage with calm authority, no script in hand. "Just truth. I was told no one would ever love me again, that no one marries a pregnant woman, that I was a mistake." She paused. "Turns out, I wasn't the mistake. I was the miracle." Applause. She continued, "My story isn't just about revenge. It's about redemption. It's about standing back up when the world tells you to sit down. It's about building a legacy, not out of spite, but out of survival." By the end, the room was in tears. And Ariel? She wasn't crying. She was leading. The gala was the kind of event that made headlines just by existing. Held at the Metropolitan Terrace, a rooftop venue famous for hosting royalty, presidents, and billionaires, the Women in Tech Honorary Gala was a who's who of power and prestige. RSVPs were closed months in advance. Tickets were 5 figures per plate. Press access was invite only. And yet, it wasn't the keynote speaker or the luxury sponsors that made this night unforgettable. It was the entrance. 8:43 p.m. The crowd had just finished dessert. The orchestra was softly playing. The stage lights were dimmed for the award segment. Then came the hush, the strange, electric pause when something shifts in the air before anyone knows why. The security guards at the front doors stiffened. Flashes from outside started popping faster. Then the doors opened. And there she was, Arielle Monroe, on the arm of Ethan Vale. Pregnant, glowing and breathtaking in a satin gown the color of fire. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek knot, showing off sharp cheekbones and diamond earrings that once belonged to a European duchess. Her hand rested gently on her belly, as if to say, yes, I'm still carrying the child he left. And yes, I'm doing better than fine. Gasps rippled through the room. Phones lifted in unison, camera lenses extended like telescopes. Even the orchestra faltered. And then, there he was, Thomas Reed. Across the room, seated at table 12, his fork froze mid-air. His new fiancée, Isabel, dropped her wine glass. He wasn't just seeing a woman he used to know. He was watching a woman he could never touch again. Ethan Vale, tall and unreadable, escorted Arielle toward the stage. Every step they took drew stares. No one in the room could look away. It was like watching royalty arrive at their own coronation. At the center of the room, the MC, clearly flustered, stammered, We'd like to welcome our unexpected guests, Mr. Vale and Ms. Monroe." Arielle smiled softly, graciously. "Sorry we're late," she said into the mic, her voice like velvet dipped in steel. "Traffic was murder." Laughter rippled, nervous and surprised. The MC chuckled, recovering. "You're right on time. In fact, you're just in time for something very special." He stepped aside. A large screen lit up behind the stage. Photos of female leaders in tech began to cycle through. Then came a slide no one expected. Special honoree, Arielle Monroe, visionary, advocate, entrepreneur. Gasps. Whispers exploded. Thomas's mouth dropped open. She wasn't just someone's guest, she was the main event. Arielle walked to the podium, took a breath, then began. "I used to think my story was over when someone I loved walked away. I thought being left meant I wasn't worth staying for, especially while carrying a child." She looked directly at Thomas. He froze. "But tonight, I stand here, not as someone abandoned, but as someone chosen, not just by a man, but by myself." She turned to the crowd. "Because survival isn't just about breathing, it's about becoming. And I became a mother, a leader, a businesswoman, and a force, because I had to." Thunderous applause. Ethan stepped forward next, quiet, poised. "I don't speak often at events like these," he said, "but I'll say this. The most powerful investments I've ever made weren't in tech or crypto. They were in people. And Arielle Monroe is the best return on investment I've ever known." Standing ovation. Isabel looked like she was sinking into her chair. Thomas sat pale and motionless. Then came the final blow. Arielle pulled a small device from her purse, clicked a button. A voice echoed across the room, the recovered voicemail from Thomas. "Yeah, man, she's knocked up. Perfect timing. Sympathy card's gonna help my Reigns pitch." Gasps. "Then I'm dropping her. Got something hotter lined up anyway." Dead silence. Arielle turned back to the mic. "Some people think power is being able to walk away. I think power is being able to walk back into a room with your head high and show them who you've become." Cameras clicked nonstop. Twitter exploded. Live streams surged. Thomas? He wasn't just exposed. He was finished. After the speech, Arielle didn't stay for long. She posed for a few photos, gave a short interview, accepted flowers from the event organizers. Then, with Ethan beside her, she made her exit. Graceful, powerful, unforgettable. Outside, a reporter shouted, "Arielle, what do you say to women watching tonight who've been through what you have?" She paused, smiled, then answered, "Don't wait for someone to come back. Build something so beautiful they regret ever leaving." Arielle Monroe didn't become a legend because she married a billionaire. She became a legend because she rebuilt herself when the world handed her a hammer and said, "Stay broken." Weeks after the gala, the buzz still hadn't died down. News outlets replayed the voicemail. Social media turned her story into a movement. Hashtags like "pregnant and powerful," "Arielle effect," and "reclaim your crown" trended for days. But Arielle didn't bask in the spotlight. She redirected it. She launched a non-profit foundation called Unbroken. dedicated to supporting single mothers, pregnant women in crisis, and survivors of emotional abuse. The first grant went to fund shelters with on-site daycare and legal aid. The second funded a tech boot camp for single moms wanting to re-enter the workforce. In interviews, she refused to play the victim. "I'm not the girl who got dumped while pregnant," she said. "I'm the woman who remembered who she was and dared to act like it." Her TED Talk broke a viewership record within 48 hours. "I used to believe strength meant being silent, that if I just held it together long enough, someone would see my value. But here's the truth. Begging doesn't make you loved. Shrinking doesn't make you safe. And silence doesn't make you strong. Speaking up does." Her words echoed across college campuses, domestic violence centers, corporate boardrooms. And one thing became clear. Arielle Monroe wasn't just telling her story. She was rewriting the stories of women everywhere. One afternoon, she sat in the nursery, rubbing her round belly, surrounded by soft light and the quiet hum of a lullaby playlist. The room was perfect, a blend of modern design and vintage charm. Bookshelves filled with stories, a rocker by the window, a mobile of stars dangling from the ceiling. It was ready. She was ready. Not because she had all the answers, not because she had a ring or a perfect past, but because she had herself, all of herself. And that was enough. As she folded tiny onesies, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a young woman named Dana. "In Milwaukee. I watched your story. My boyfriend said the same thing. No one's gonna want you pregnant." I almost believed him. "But then I saw you walk into that room like a damn queen. I'm choosing me now. Thank you." Arielle smiled, heart full. The movement wasn't about her anymore. It was about them. The millions of women who had been told they were too much or not enough, who had been left behind, talked down to, laughed at, underestimated. This was for the girls who cried in bathrooms and still showed up to work. For the women who stayed quiet at dinner tables while men took credit. For the mothers who raised empires from broken hearts and borrowed money. This was for every woman who ever asked herself, "Am I hard to love?" and never got an answer that felt like the truth. Arielle had the answer now. No, you are not hard to love. You are just not meant to be loved by cowards. When her daughter was born, Arielle named her Nova. It means new beginning. And as she held her in that hospital room, her hand in Ethan's, the city skyline blown beyond the window, she whispered, "You'll never have to shrink to fit into love. Not on my watch." Months later, she stood on the cover of Forbes. The headline read, "From pregnant and publicly dumped to powerhouse philanthropist, the rise of Arielle Monroe." And underneath in small print, "Sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest gift of all." In her next keynote speech, she closed with this. "To every woman out there waiting for closure, stop waiting. Closure is what they give you when they're done. Power is what you give yourself when you decide you're just getting started." She smiled, held the mic like a sword. Let this be your wake-up call. You don't need to be rescued. You need to remember you were never weak, just quiet. But not anymore.